Welcome, everyone. This is one of a series of AGA webinars on navigating the program requirements and ACGME site inspection process. Today, we're going to talk specifically about meeting the ACGME program requirements. This is particularly important to address new changes, and Amy's even added some new things since our last address of this topic. I'm Adeline Almeida, Associate Program Director at Yale University. I'll be moderating today along with Tamara Jones and Joya Kinney from the AGA, who've been instrumental in putting this program together. I just have a few introductory words before we get started. As you can see on the intro slide, we hope to have open discussion throughout, so you should feel free to ask a question if you want throughout, but we hope actually that we will be able to minimize background noise. That presents unique challenges, I think, during the day. But if you could turn off your cell phones and your pagers, that I think will help quite a lot. Also, try to be courteous when others are speaking. That way, we'll be able to have a nice, fluid discussion. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be available later. And as well, the speakers will make some of their materials available at a later date. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists today. Amy Oxentenko is an Assistant Professor of Medicine GI Program Director at Mayo, Rochester. Anton Decker is an Associate Professor of Medicine GI Program Director at Mayo, Arizona. Both have been leaders in innovative approaches to training and evaluating GI fellows. And through their involvement in the AGA and the GI Training Directors Workshop, they've emerged as leaders in helping other program directors interpret and apply ACGME requirements. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Amy.
So welcome, everybody. I know it can be challenging to find a time that works for everybody, so we tried one evening session. So we'll see how it goes to do a session during the middle of the workday. So really, the focus of what I'm going to talk about are the changes that are coming to the ACGME requirements in the next year, and really to highlight the things that I think will represent some particular challenges to programs and some things that you'll just need to prepare for. So I have nothing to disclose, and really these are the things that I'm going to cover. So first I'll review some of the changes to the ACGME GI program requirements that will be taking place in July of 2012, and some of these changes will include some changes to the common program requirements as they will affect GI programs as well. And then I'll just give some examples and suggestions of some ways that our program are preparing for these changes, but by all means, these are just examples, and I fully appreciate that every institution is going to have to handle things potentially in their unique way depending on their circumstances, but I think this is also a great way to share practices so that we're not all reinventing the same wheel. So this was our outline when we did the last webinar about a month ago, and then suddenly in the last month came the new accreditation system, which really I think throws another layer onto everything that we presented at the last webinar. So for those of you who have just maybe heard a little bit about this or nothing at all, I just wanted to highlight just a few key points and keep this in the back of your mind throughout the presentation as well. So this was really announced in the New England Journal of Medicine article in the last month and presented at the ACGME meeting this last month as well. So the new accreditation system is going to be rolling out to 7 core programs in 2013. That's largely programs like emergency medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, and a few of the surgical programs and radiology. And all of the other programs will have the new accreditation system rolled out in 2014. And so really the highlight of this new system is that it will allow for programs that are considered highly functioning by the ACGME to have longer intervals for site visits, longer meaning up to 10 years, which is great. It also will eliminate the program information form known as the PIF that we're all used to. But what will take place or in exchange is that it will require programs to do more frequent reporting to the ACGME, likely on a yearly basis, on how your trainees are meeting milestones that have been set forth for each specialty, if those milestones are being met, and then it will also base the length of your visit based on your trainee and your faculty survey. So again, I have the link to the New England Journal of Medicine article on the bottom there, so if you haven't had a chance to read that, I think that would be really helpful for all. So this is a cartoon that one of my colleagues sent me after the new requirements came out. This was in the New Yorker magazine, and it was really intended for the new banking industry, but he thought it fit well with medical education. And if you can't read the capture, it says, these new regulations will fundamentally change the way we get around them. So I think, obviously, that's a cynical way of looking at it. I think the way that we really need to approach this is the new accreditation system will really allow programs who are following the new program requirements that we're going to talk about, and that will really align you best to be considered one of these highly functioning programs. So you might say, well, those changes are taking place in 2014 for GI. We have these other changes taking place this summer for 2012. What do we do over the next 2 years then between that gap? So over the next 2 years, milestones will be specifically created for GI, and I haven't seen what those will look like at this point. Programs still need to be worked between now and then on how to meet all of the new program requirements that we're going to talk about. And again, this is the best way that each program can prepare to be considered a, quote, highly functioning program is the term that's been used by the ACGME. And really what that's going to allow is by having longer site visit intervals, it will give programs time for increased innovation rather than, just feeling like they're constantly coming up with things just to fulfill requirements. So that brings us back to the talk or the discussion point for today, the new ACGME requirements. So when I refer to various requirements within these, I'm really referring to the GI program requirements, and the link is on the bottom of the slide. This also contains the common program requirements embedded in this document. And for me, it was most helpful to look at the tracked changes document just so you can see what's been newly added and what's been the accreditation information that I mentioned. Here's the cartoon. Okay. All right. So we'll talk about the first new initiative in the new program requirements, which are really relating to quality and safety. So this is a quote: the sponsoring institution and participating sites must demonstrate that there's a culture of continuous quality improvement in the areas of patient care, patient safety, and education. And I think really the new accreditation system, this is really one of the highlights, is quality improvement and patient safety. So as it relates to this, all fellows must be involved with some quality improvement initiative at your program. That doesn't mean that each of them have to have their each individual unique project, but they have to be part of a team collaborating on a project. So this would really fulfill, I think, the CI or the QI project for patient care and patient safety, depending on which projects you select for your trainees. And so here's a few examples of projects we've had our trainees do. These have been self-selected by them, but obviously you could get input from your, quality chair about things that the division thinks are important things to be studying. So we looked at improving adenoma detection rates based on physician exam, providing surveillance intervals in part of our pathology reports to the ordering physicians, and then also providing preventative measures for patients with certain conditions like those with IBD or cirrhosis. So again, I think if you're doing quality improvement projects on things related to patient care and patient safety, your fellows would be fulfilling this criteria. Again, the whole climate of safety is going to be a big area of the new accreditation system, and so they really want to know that you're sampling your trainees about the culture of safety in your facility. And so the way that we've accomplished this is we've taken our, end of rotation surveys, asking them about their rotation, and I don't know how well this projects, but we just added some safety climate questions in their electronic survey here. So things about, I would feel safe being treated here as a patient. Medical errors are handled appropriately. It's not difficult to discuss errors. So there isn't, a minimum number of these, at least as far as I'm aware, that you need to add, but I think you need to be sampling your trainees to see if they have climate of safety questions. Part of that requirement also said you could be doing QI, or you should be doing quality improvement.
All callers are muted.
Hello? Can people hear me?
Yes, we're still here.
I can hear you.
Right. So in terms of quality improvement for education, what you can really be doing as a training director, education coordinator, look at ways that you can track educational improvements you're making for your programs. So let's say you do something that is enhancing your procedural training for your trainees. Is there something that you can track before or after that intervention to show that you've made improvements, whether it's the number of procedures they get, the educational feedback they're getting, and then any new educational experiences that you're adding to your program really are considered quality improvement. Another thing that really can count under this realm of quality improvement for education is what kind of feedback are you supplying to faculty based on their teaching performance? And again, based on that feedback that you're—
All callers are unmuted.
How is that tracking changes over time? So that kind of fits in actually with another new program requirement about faculty performance data, that you really need to be sharing appropriate inpatient and outpatient faculty performance data with the program director. So all of the programs should be getting information from your institution about the faculty that are teaching your fellows. And again, for me, I was able to find a way to tie in faculty performance data to that last slide about quality improvement in education. And so this is just kind of an example. So I'm able to look in our evaluation system. So this is an institutional system. This isn't something that's been created for AI. But I'm able to look here for a certain academic year, and I have all my faculty whose names are removed, and I can see their average evaluation score over that academic year, ranging from an average score of 1 to 5. So you can see here, I'm able to see how they rank in terms of their colleagues. I'm also able to drill down in the system and see what their completion rate for evaluation forms on fellows are. I'm also able to see a composite of all of the specific comments they've provided to fellows over the course of an academic year, and if it's really behavioral and criterion-based feedback. So this is a form that we've created that I actually fill out and I give to our division chair for each faculty member's annual review. And so I'll put the faculty's name, what rotations they tend to do with our fellows. Based on that last sheet that I showed you, I'll give them their score, and I'll show them what the division average is, just so they know where they sit regarding peers. I've actually taken out the rank just because I thought that might be a little bit volatile for some, and I think just knowing where they sit in terms of average is helpful. Then I give them kind of highlights of things they're doing well based on fellow feedback, things that they could improve on. I show what their completion rate for evaluations are. You can see this person has a very low completion rate. And then I show them what their average score that they give to trainees is based on a scale from 1 to 5. And I give them feedback. If there's someone who always gives the same score for everybody, obviously that's not ideal. And then again, I put what type of feedback they're giving to fellows. So this is someone who gave very little written feedback other than providing scores. And then on the bottom, I give basically a summary of all of the above things. And for certain individuals, such as this person, I recommend a certain faculty development course that we have here on campus on improving giving feedback to trainees. So again, this could be a way that you could count for quality improvement for education, because I'm hoping over the course of each year that I'll see some of the faculty who had major issues with completion rate, diversifying their scores, et cetera, that I'll be able to track performance improvement. This is also obviously a way for me to get information on how these people are doing in terms of teaching my fellows. So moving on, the next area is direct observation, and this is a new area that has several layers to it. The first one is one of the key clinical faculty must be knowledge in the evaluation and assessment of the competencies, and I think this is probably pretty standard at this point. I think probably the program director or the APD really needs to be in charge of knowing and feeling comfortable with the competencies. They also need to spend significant time in the evaluation of fellows, including direct observation. And you must assess the fellow and all of these things in both the inpatient and outpatient setting, and this assessment must involve direct observation of encounters. So again, this is somewhat of a new area. Getting to the first bullet point again, I think this is common knowledge at this point that we really have to be very familiar with these competencies. And the ACGME has online tutorials about the competencies from the Outcome Project. And in addition, they're going to be developing slides about the new accreditation system as well. And what you could do is you could use these slide sets, unless you have your own, to teach key clinical faculty about these changes. And some of these teaching sessions, whether it's part of your division meeting or other educational sessions, can count as faculty development. And if you look at the new program requirements, actually you have to be tracking faculty development on educational topics for your faculty. So this could be a way to fulfill that as well. So what about this direct observation piece? So as I mentioned, this needs to occur in 3 different arenas for our GI fellows. It needs to occur in the inpatient if you have inpatient rotations. It has to occur in the outpatient setting and also during endoscopy. So I think probably for most of us, we do this in the inpatient setting, in the endoscopy setting largely because we have to be. And in the inpatient setting, we probably do this as well on a hospital service or consult service because we are side by side with the fellow when we're going over counseling for patients. But in the outpatient, it'd be interesting to know how many of us actually are observing our fellows in the outpatient setting, either directly or through other mechanisms. And if you're not, then that's going to be an area that you're going to need to look into options that you can do. So one option is very simple, very cheap. It's free, basically, is you going in the room with the fellow for certain parts of the either history taking, the exam, or the counseling, and taking note of that. Some other options, which obviously would require some resources, would be to use rooms that have potentially a one-way mirror in an adjacent room so that you can observe basically directly but through a one-way mirror. And another option, and one that we're actually having installed in our program, is a camera system so that there's a camera in the room with the fellow and the patient, and the faculty member is in an adjacent room able to watch this through the computer system. So those are some options that you could think about, but you're going to need to adopt or consider one of these. So at our last webinar, we really didn't know, and I didn't know how many assessments you needed to do, but at the annual ACGME meeting, this was a number that was thrown out there. I don't know if this will be was actually in the final requirements, but they said you need to have at least 10 assessments by 5 faculty every 6 months. So this needs to be done with some regularity, and it can't be done just by one key clinical faculty. You're going to have a core group of faculty comfortable with this. We're also going to have an assessment tool, and I know in our last webinar people have said that there's some ABIM forms or tools that you could use, let's say for an OSCE or things like that, that you could adopt to record these assessments. So a couple benefits as well, besides fulfilling a requirement, is I think there's a potential upside to the faculty who participate in these direct observation. And obviously you're going to want to pick faculty who are very good at giving direct feedback to fellows. But another pearl for them is that they can use ABIM MOC credit, and they can receive 20 points in that practice improvement, 20 points that you need for recertification by doing this direct observation. So I recently recertified for internal medicine, and this is what I did for my 20 practice improvement points. So basically you just need to do a number of 10 observation audit cycles with at least two different trainees. And you basically fill out a form as you're observing either the history of the exam or the counseling session, and then you also do a review of their note about that patient encounter, and you do a quick form on that, and again, that's worth 20 ABIM MOC credit points. So I'm going to see if I can get this polling thing to work here. Let's see how. So we're going to just add some questions throughout this. So are you or your faculty currently using fellowship training to obtain MOC credit? So whether it's for something like this direct observation or you can receive MOC points, again, the practice improvement points for doing quality improvement projects for your trainees. So I'll leave this. We'll open this poll here for people to vote. Hopefully you should see voting on your screen there, and you can choose yes or no. It looks like 90% are not using any ABIM MOC credits based on things you're doing in your fellowship. A couple people are. So it's something at least to consider. Again, I don't think it should be the reason faculty are selected to do these things because they just need the MOC. Obviously, you want to pick faculty who are going to be, interested in these sorts of things. But then they also have that as the pearl. So can everyone see my slides again, going back to them?
No.
Yeah, we've just got the panelists.
Okay.
Amy, did you click the sharing screen?
Yep. Now, do you see it again?
No.
Not yet.
No.
It'll come up in a minute.
No?
No. Here it comes.
Okay. All right. So again, here is the clinical supervision practice improvement module based on the ABIM. So if you're interested, you could go to the ABIM to pull that up. So another new change is core conferences. So the program must afford each fellow an opportunity to review topics covered in conferences that he or she was unable to attend. And again, this could be done in a variety of different ways. Some people might be doing webcasting. Some people might be doing recording options, and I think that was something that came up at our last webinar. I think there's a variety of different things that could be used, and I think some of these were discussed at the ACGME meeting as well. I think there's a program called Integrity, and there's other similar programs. And what one of the last conference participants told us about with this one called Integrity, for example, is it almost sounds like a USB port that you're able to stick into a computer in a conference room, and you have the option to not only record what's on the screen in terms of the slides, but also the audio. And so that would be a way, I don't know the cost of this system, but without having to record, or put in cameras in a room, it's something that's portable, which is especially nice if your conferences move from room to room. The other option, and obviously it doesn't get the benefit necessarily of the audio, is to at least have the slides available to your trainees. So that's what we do. We basically, at this point, have a list of our conferences on the fellows' websites with link to all of the slides from the various talks. But I think having the audio and capturing the audio is clearly something that would augment the presentations. So I could go back to the poll. I just want to, just for the sake of time, if how many people are using this system to record conferences other than simply showing slides? Anybody?
We show slides.
Okay. So it might be worth, and I can even look into, like I said, I know after the ACGME meeting, I was sent about 4 different recording choices in addition to this Integrity one that we heard about last time. So that's something that might be worth looking into for programs that are interested in that. So the next area is under the realm of practice management. So this new requirement is that fellows must receive instruction in practice management relevant to gastroenterology. So, again, it doesn't say specifically what the topics need to be. What we've done is institutionally within our Graduate School of Medical Education, we've come up with a list of topics that would be generalizable to really all trainees in any training program, residency or fellowship. And here's a list of the topics, including contract negotiation, personal and business management, organizing and financing a practice, and billing and coding. And so what our graduate school has done is put together some of these over the noon hour. Basically, I'm requiring my fellows to attend them, so at least it shows that I have some generalizable topics for practice management. But then you obviously, and based on the requirement, need to have some specialty-specific topics for gastroenterology. So these could be things like how to manage an endoscopy or surgical center. Again, some that are maybe a little bit more general, like practice efficiency and productivity, but that may have some special things within GI worthy of addressing. And then one thing that I've done over the last year is had some of our alumni who are in private practice in regional areas come back and go over things with fellows in terms of how they found contracts, how they reviewed contracts and negotiated contracts, and unique things about their practice setting. So we heard last time that the AGA actually has a section from the training committee that's working on some GI-specific modules that they're hoping to share so that, again, we don't all have to reinvent new ideas about what these topics should be like. Another new area or something that's been expanded is simulation. So again, this says that all fellows must participate in training using simulation. So I think the important thing to know that based on their definition, simulation equals learning about patient care in a setting that does not include real patients. So a simulator or a simulation center is not needed for this requirement, which I think is important because I think a lot of people equate simulation with a simulator. So if you look under the internal medicine frequently asked questions, they give this list of examples of simulation. So you could use a simulator if you have one. If you have anything with animal models, you could use that. If you have OSCEs, standardized patients or patient simulators, you could use those. And then obviously if you have anything where you have an electronic simulation of codes, procedures, or other clinical scenarios, those are all under the definition of what they view as simulation. So again, they just have to have that experience. So this is something, again, switching to procedure logging. So we all know that fellows have had to keep procedure logs in terms of the numbers of each of their procedures, but something in the common requirement states that fellows in their fellow record for procedures need to include the details of the indications, the outcomes, the diagnoses, and the supervisors for each of their procedures. So this is clearly a change that we had not been doing. We have been simply recording how many EGDs, how many dilations, et cetera, not this sort of granular detail by any stretch of the means. So at least looking in terms of what's out there for options for everybody, the AGA does have the GI Learn, which is a procedure entering system. I put the link here, and this is basically what the form looks like. So you can put in the identifiers, check what procedure it was, put in the description, indications, pathology, and complications. So this is out there and available to people. My only concern is that if a fellow, let's say they're on they're doing procedures all day long, this could be time intensive for them in terms of manually entering this unless they could easily cut and paste from one procedure to another. So I'll tell you what we did. So again, this is our old procedure log, just a bunch of numbers, didn't have any of the qualifications that the new requirements need. So this, and it's probably a little challenging to read, but this is our new procedure log enhancement that is taking into consideration these new DELs. So basically, we through our endoscopy database, have a procedure surgical report that's generated for each of our endoscopic procedures. And there is an internal Mayo system that was developed called Mayo Log. And what happens every night in the middle of the night are any procedure or surgical reports that have one of our trainees' names on it are pulled into this Mayo Log and categorized under each trainee. So when a trainee pulls up their procedure log now, what they'll see, and they'll see the last and first name of the patient, the clinic number, gender, the date the procedure was done, who their attending was for each of the various procedure. It will have the trainee's name, the indication that's on the surgical report for the procedure, all of the diagnoses or findings that were noted during the procedure, what procedure was actually done, and then the fellow has to basically just click on a single box in this column here where it says confirm to confirm that they were involved with that procedure. And then we have a drop-down menu for complications. We've defaulted it to none. Obviously, if they had bleeding or perforation, they'd have to drop down for that. So again, this really requires the only thing from the trainee is to click on a box stating that they confirmed with each of these. The other enhancements we made is on this little hourglass over here, magnifying glass. If the trainee clicks on that, the actual procedure report pops up for their review. One thing we're also doing right now as well that I thought would be a nice enhancement is adding another one of those little magnifying glasses right here. So when the fellow sees that biopsies were taken, they're going to be able to click on that and see the pathology report as well, which I think would be some good feedback for them.
Amy,
again, the nice thing from, that I think a system like this, which clearly requires working with IT in your institution, but I think especially for a very procedural, heavy specialty, the less manual entry a trainee has to do, the more accurate the procedure logs. I think the nice thing, the thing working with your IT is the ACGME with this new accreditation system is going to have you download procedure logs. And so having a logging system that is compatible with what the ACGME will accept is important. And so I did that checking, and our Mayo log is compatible with what the ACGME accepts. So again, that might be a first step to take before developing something internally.
Amy, do your fellows only do procedures at Mayo, or do they use any satellite clinics? And if so, how do you handle that?
They can do elective rotations at the other two Mayo sites, and they can spend an elective at one of our Mayo health systems, which are in the Minnesota-Wisconsin region. So these would not, the procedures they do there would not necessarily be tracked in this procedure log, so they need to bring something back from that standpoint. But usually, at most, a fellow will do 1 month at one of those other sites, and probably half of our fellows don't go to those sites.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have fellows going to multiple sites, then you may need a more central system like the AGA GI Learn system where, they could access that from wherever they are. I'm sorry, did someone have a question? I didn't capture that. It sounded really fuzzy.
Amy, I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you inferring that the ACGME is eventually going to require an electronic download of this information, or are they going to take paper?
Well, I'm not sure on that, but if you look at the ACGME newsletters that come out regularly, some of the programs already have been required to download procedure logs to the ACGME. And I think that's going to be continually expanded with this new accreditation system. So at least when I look at the ACGME links when those newsletters are sent, it says on there, please these specialties, please download your procedure logs now. So I don't know if you're able to do that in a way other than electronic or not.
I have a question.
Yep.
Amy, so my understanding is that the ACGME has its own procedure log for the surgical residencies. Mm-hmm. And that's how they're able to do that. They actually go into the ACGME site to enter that. Yep. And I think OB does that as well.
Yep.
So it seems like they would have to create that log for us.
Yeah, they may. I mean, these requirements are really required of us starting this summer, but, I haven't seen a form like that from them that GI will be populating or, like you said, you would think they would have to develop one for us if that was the case. So it may be that just a tincture of time will we see something from that we can populate just like the surgical programs. Until that's up in place, and, obviously all institutions are not going to have the kind of technical support to create this. And so I would hope that they would at least allow any paper kind of tracking systems until they're able to provide something to institutions that don't have something in place. All right, so continuing under the idea of procedure logging. So this is really, I think, going to be the big area for us in GI in terms of the new accreditation system is documenting competence. And in the new requirements, it says that each program must define competence for all required, and actually it also lists for elective procedures. So that was something that I was not aware of, that even for elective procedures we have to have criteria for competence. And that basically, as part of their logbook, we have to show that fellows are documenting competence in each of these procedures. So I've talked about this before at the training director workshop, but there's a multi-society evaluation form. You can see all the societies there that had input in this. And the website is on the link there. And this is what the procedure form looks like for colonoscopy. Again, a number of questions that you can answer on your trainee for each colonoscopy procedure that the faculty member observes. So again, a 1 to 9 scale. Are there downfalls of this form? I think there's probably potentially downfalls of anything that any of us create, but at least on the multi-society form, there's not as many anchoring characteristics as you might need to see. We don't know if it's been validated for continuous assessment of a trainee across their 3 years of training. And how do we take that form and compare a graduate from one training program to another to know that they've had, are we defining competency in the same way? And I think the bigger question is how will these kind of competency, assessments that we are creating be transformed into these milestones? And that's really, like I said, I think the area that we're going to need to see well-defined for GI in this new accreditation system are what are the milestones that will be developed for us to say that a trainee is tracking along in their procedure training and meeting the requirement for competency. So I think this is going to be an area, obviously, that's going to require a fair amount of work. So this is, again, a form that we have, and I've presented this previously. This is a form that's embedded in our endoscopy database. Unfortunately, we're changing to probation this fall, so I don't know how transferable this will be into that system, although I know probation is willing to work with us to make this available for other programs as well who have been interested. So right now, for each colonoscopy that a faculty member observes, they fill out a quick 13-item survey on that trainee. It takes less than a minute to complete. And it allows for recording of, the procedure number, fellow name, et cetera, along with which colonoscopy it is in their series of total colonoscopy numbers. So again, I'm not going to show all the questions, but the last 2 questions of the questionnaire ask about the fellow's hands-on skills and cognitive skills. And really all of the other items on the survey, the other 11 items, really link and tie into these 2 overall questions. So this is right now at least what we're doing for colonoscopy competency. We have this tracking system where the pink line is all fellows that we've had in our training program, and the mean score that they've had for hands-on skill, cognitive skill, fecal intubation rate, and insertion time tracked over every 50th colonoscopy. And the blue line is one particular fellow, so I get a data point on each fellow every 50 colonoscopies. And then this is a little bit hard to see, but we've just kind of selected a line that we think is what our fellows, should be at in terms of being competent. And you can see we have means, and then we have 2 standard deviations above and below the mean. Our education committee felt that, everyone's not going to be at or above the mean because that defies what the mean is, and that we would really, as long as someone's within 2 standard deviations of the mean, assuming we're not getting other feedback that's concerning, that would be our bar for competency. Now, again, we have this for colonoscopy. We haven't developed this for EGD, PEG tubes, all of the other procedures within GI that would need at least some similar sort of milestone competency scale in this new accreditation system. So I think moving ahead, obviously it's going to be too arduous, and the feedback we've gotten from staff is if this is expanded to all of our procedures, it's too arduous to complete 13 questions when they're doing, let's say, 12 EGDs in a morning with a fellow. And again, we need to expand these kind of questions or surveys not only from colonoscopy, but for required and elective procedures. So I think, again, that's probably going to be the biggest area of focus for GI within the new accreditation system in developing these milestones, and specifically milestones for procedures. So I'm just going to finish up talking about multi-source evaluations. I think a lot of programs are doing some sort of multi-source evaluations, but I think the definition of what the ACGME wants for multi-source has expanded. So now it not only includes patients, peers, and non-physician team members. So really you have to have some observations from those groups. And really it's allowing you to fulfill the competency of communication, assessment, interpersonal and communication skills, etc. So here's a few examples that we've done. Here's a patient survey that we give out on our fellows' patients. The survey has just a brief description of what a fellow is. It has a picture of that fellow because, as you can imagine, by the time the patient has been roomed, they see the desk CA that rooms them, they see the fellow, they see the faculty, they're not sure who they're evaluating. So we've included the fellow's picture. They rate them on a series of questions. We ask them if they would refer this a friend or a family member to this physician, and we ask if there's anything specific that could be improved upon and ask them to give additional comments. So they can either drop the survey off at the desk. We also give them a pre-postage envelope so they can mail this when they return home, which has increased our yield. We give this. We try to have the desk give this to every fellow's new patient that's seen in their clinic. But I tell you, I think either patients don't fill them out or just remembering for the desk to give them to each patient can be an issue. And when I meet with the fellows every 4 to 6 months, I might get anywhere from 10 to 20 of these back over that period of time. Here's an evaluation that we give to our secretary or allied staff for the fellows. And what we do is our education coordinators will email this 360 evaluation to the specific, our fellows have, let's say, a secretary or a desk that they largely work out of. So the week before I have my semi-annual meeting with that fellow, the education coordinators will email the survey to any particular allied staff that fellow works with. And again, you can set up the questionnaire so that you're targeting specific competencies where you may not have other assessment tools that are robust. So patient care, systems-based practice, et cetera. And so these are very helpful. For peer evaluation, this is a little bit challenging for us because we don't have a lot of things where our fellows necessarily work together. So what we've done, though, on a select number of rotations, let's say where it's a consult service or our transplant service where they're doing handoffs of care, other rotations like this, we've added a few questions that are related to peer of peer, so really transfers of care, communication in terms of cross-cover and transition, et cetera. So again, this is a new requirement in the new accreditation system is how are you evaluating transition of care for your trainees. So again, adding a few questions on your end-of-rotation questionnaire for rotation specifically where a fellow is responsible for handing off care to another fellow would be the area to target that. So by all means, this is not a review of all of the new program requirements, but what I did is took the ones that I thought were really going to probably require the most work for some programs. But again, I think a lot of these things could be adopted from program to a program so that everyone's not having to create new forms, new evaluation system, and as many of these things could be transferred from one program to another, I think that's the way that we're going to need to move forward, especially with this upcoming new accreditation system, because we're all going to be really tasked with the same milestones. So how we're all meeting those same milestones in a similar way will be really important. So that's all I have for slides. So while we're getting Anton's slides ready, I can answer any questions that have come up so far.
Will these slides be available for us?
Yep, we will make these slides available.
Do we know when we might have the milestones, the specific milestones for the program?
I don't. You know, in terms of the 7 core programs that that are going to be in the first new accreditation system, those milestones are currently, at least based on what have been stated, those have been created or are near finalization. So all of the other programs that are going to be out in 2014, I don't know how much baseline work has been put into those at this time.
Yeah.
Amy?
I'm trying to make Anton the presenter, but when I click on his name, making him a presenter is not an option.
If you click Stop Sharing first.
All right, got it.
And then right-click on his name.
Got it. Thank you.
Amy, do you know who is involved in making those milestones for the GI? Is it ACGME group or?
Well, you know, when you look at who's created them for the initial core primary programs, it's not necessarily just one group. It's a collection of people from training director committees, from accreditation boards. It's trainee involvement. It's some of the some of the specialty or subspecialty societies. So I don't know that it's going to be just necessarily one specific group charged with it. It's probably going to be people from a number of groups that are going to be involved with creating those milestones. Thanks.
Amy, a quick question for you in terms of the numbers of procedures required.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers required for the various types of procedures was generated, I think, back in as long ago as 2007.
Mm-hmm.
But in the very latest thing, I can't find any numbers except for the fact they want 140 colonoscopies and 30 polypectomies. Do you know of any other numbers for the other procedures, whether they've changed or not?
I haven't seen any specific numbers or changes. I mean, obviously in the last system, liver biopsies have fallen off as a requirement, but no, otherwise the specific numbers, I haven't seen any changes. It's just that they've stated the same number for colonoscopies.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anton, I'll hand it over to you.
So can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And can you see my slides? It says common citations.
Yes.
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 All right. So, Tamara, just help me out here. We've got until 10 o'clock, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, that's correct.
No, it's okay. I just need so I can pace myself. A lot of what I would like to discuss has already been dealt with, so it's really to go over it briefly and then to focus on some innovative things we're doing at the end of the presentation. Amy, a few months ago, drew my attention to a easily missed section inside of this publication that we all get, and I, unfortunately, don't frequently scrutinize, and this is RRC News by the ACGME. And within that, and I've included the link here, were common citations in 2010 for various programs, including gastroenterology. So we thought it would be quite handy to go through these and draw everyone's attention to the most common citations. The first and most common citation was to do with the evaluation of fellows, and there were 14 citations in this group. And the first one was that the program has not documented that fellows' performance is evaluated in writing and or verbally, and that the program does not use multi-source evaluations. So, you know, what I do is I look at this and then say, okay, where is the roadmap to help me avoid the citation? And to do that, you need to go back to the common program requirements. And in this case, for example, there's a whole section on evaluation which will give you guidance on the rules by which we have to play. So time won't allow us to go through this in detail, but the point that I want to get across is that for each one of these citations, you can go back to the rule book and see how to avoid the citation. when I look at the citation of the fact that multi-source evaluations are not used, I thought I could at least, and Amy has also done this, draw your attention to what we do in Mayo, Arizona, in terms of our various modalities for evaluating fellows. And firstly, we've got the end of rotation evaluations by faculties and fellows, and the system we use is homegrown, called Integrated Scheduling and Evaluation System. And it's nicely designed in that it forces the evaluator to address all of the competencies. And this, again, is what it looks like. So it's designed to address all of the competencies. And if the evaluator gives the fellow a 5, they're forced to write a comment. And then it ends with some general comments and ask them whether feedback was provided to the fellows. So these are also easily adaptable. If we have something new that we want to evaluate, we can speak to the administrator to add a section as required. And then, as I will discuss at the end of this presentation, we also now have end-of-rotation oral examinations. We've got 360 evaluations by allied health staff, and then there are also patient questionnaires that Amy has already discussed. We also have conference presentation scoring sheets. Every time the fellow does a presentation, everyone in the audience gives them a score and feedback. We have direct observation that Amy has spoken about, where we have to get our act together as in the clinic. In endoscopy, it's on autopilot and works pretty well because you have the faculty in the room observing the fellow. In the hospital, you round together, but in the clinic, we have to adjust things so that we meet the new requirements, and Amy's already discussed that. We have 6 monthly program director reviews for the fellows. We've got the AGA in-service examinations, and then we've also got the procedural logs. So I think that's all of the evaluation tools we have, and it meets the criteria of being multi-source evaluation methods. Under the 14 citations under the evaluations of fellows, there was also the comment that the citation for fellows' performance in continuity clinic is not documented. So at the end of the month, whoever supervised the fellow in our continuity clinic is also given one of those evaluation forms to complete. So to fulfill that criteria is really not too difficult. Then there's the record of evaluation does not include logbook, or logbook is missing the required elements. I won't go back to this, but because Amy's already discussed the elements required in the logbook, and we have spoken to our IT people to automatically get this information out of our reporting system. We now use provations, so that data is already there. You just have to get someone to export it for you. And then lastly, the program does not use direct observation tools to assess fellows. So this seems to be an important theme that is repeating itself. The next section was didactic or patient care components. There were 10 citations in 2010. Firstly, the program does not ensure that fellows are provided formal instruction or clinical experiences with all required procedures. Now, for this section, again, just to demonstrate how I go about it, is I go back and look where the rules are for this part of the game. And if you do section 4A, 5A, for example, is the answer to this question. The fellows must demonstrate competency in the performance of the following procedures, and then it lists the procedures. Where some programs may be at danger is in the procedures where some experience is required but not necessarily competency. and that is down here. For example, fellows must have formal instruction and clinical experience in the interpretation of the following diagnostic and therapeutic techniques and procedures. And this is things like ERCP and a lot of motility testing. So even if your program doesn't have certain procedures available, then the fellows must still receive detailed instruction on these procedures. And I think that's where programs may be falling short.
Question?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I thought we all opposed the paracentesis. Did that actually sneak through?
I'm looking over here.
It was on that list.
Was it on the first list?
It was on the list that you
One
flashed just before, but are you on the track changes or the very final?
No, I'm on the track changes.
Because I thought we all got fairly upset about paracentesis since, you know, for the most part, fellows aren't doing it.
We need to, so this is the track changes one. Does anyone else know the answer to that question?
I think it was on that list from when you just scrolled through, and I don't think it had a cross out, so that would mean that it would still be included. Should be right on that.
Yeah, so there we go. It hasn't been crossed out.
There it is, at the bottom.
Yeah.
A5A3J.
Right there.
Well, I.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to look into this because there was a period, like a period where you could have public response to their thing, and I thought all the GI program directors were pretty heavily against including paracentesis.
So maybe in the final version it'll be out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll look into it.
Thank you for pointing that out. The next point was the program does not provide an organized didactic curriculum, and there are detailed instructions in the common program requirements that this is required. So this is really just a matter of following the rules. Now, then there were further citations where the program does not provide a monthly research conference. This really one just has to go back to the program requirements to see that is required. And the program does not ensure that conferences are regularly scheduled and attended by faculty and fellows. Next is sponsoring institutions, 7 citations. Internal review did not occur or was not done at the midpoint of the accreditation cycle. As I'm sure with most of you, I just wait for our program coordinator to tell me what to do for this type of thing. But mid-cycle, you need an internal review. And then lastly, the program letters of agreement did not contain all of the required elements. And again, the rule book is within this document, and in this track changes version, it's line 108. And here tells you what the program letter of agreement should contain. So that is wherever your fellows rotate to the agreement between you and that institution. So in closing, I just wanted to go through how we assess knowledge in Arizona, as this is one of the requirements. So what tools do we have to assess knowledge? We've got the AGA in-service examination. I think they're great, and the reports that we get from them are becoming more and more useful as they give the fellows breakdown of where they did or didn't score well. I'd be interested in others' feedback, but I've told our fellows very clearly that we take the in-service exam seriously and that we will fine-tune or adjust their rotations depending on what areas they appear to need help in. The fellows quickly pointed out to me that the AGA made a statement saying that that we have to be cautious on how we use the in-service exam results, so that you cannot use them to deny promotion to the next year and that type of thing. So even we don't use the in-service exam scores in that type of way, but we still find them very useful to tailor rotations for where the fellows may be struggling, or to give them mentors or for certain areas. Then the board examinations are an important assessment tool. Unfortunately, the fellows have usually left by the time we get that back, but that helps, gives us a good idea of where we stand. We do lots of practice multiple choice questions in the core curriculum sessions every week. There's a lot of subjective clinical observation. And then we instituted an end of rotation oral examination about a year and a half or 2 years ago. So,
great.
Please go ahead.
Emergency condition has been reported to exist within the building.
So the end of rotation oral examinations, I've really enjoyed this in that it's an old way of assessing a trainee, something that I grew up with, and I was fascinated that it didn't exist as my training in GI, as I did my own training in GI. And one of the reasons why we decided to bring this back is that multiple choice questions is one way of assessing knowledge. But ultimately, if you're going to release someone into the public as a specialist gastroenterologist, you want to know that they've got a mature understanding of a topic. And in my mind, one of the best ways to know whether someone has a mature understanding of a topic is just to talk to them about a topic and ask them how they're going to approach various diseases or scenarios. So what I did is I got all the faculty in Arizona to compile questions in their subspecialty. And the questions were designed to stimulate reading, open-ended questions that the fellows get at the start of their rotation. So there are no secrets. They're given the questions in the beginning of the rotation, and they've got a whole month to find and prepare the answers. The questions are challenging by design, and then in the last week of the rotation, the fellows have 2 30-minute oral examinations with 2 different faculty members. The challenges in instituting this was typical for all change, which is usually painful. I had to get buy-in from the division chair to block calendars for the examinations. We had to get buy-in from the faculty. A common question from the faculty is whether they could have the answers to the questions. And, that would be very difficult because these are open-ended questions, which I'll demonstrate you in a minute, where you kind of ask the fellows, discuss your approach to X or Y. So we haven't provided the answers to the questions and don't really want to, because that's not the point of these oral examinations. The fellows were very unhappy at first and threatened me with all sorts of things. But now that I've been up and running for almost 2 years, you can ask the fellows yourself in our program, and to make sure I'm not telling you a lie. The moment they've done these oral examinations, they usually stop by my office and tell me it's the best thing they've ever done, because they were really forced to prepare for it, and they finish a rotation with a great satisfaction of being a master of a particular topic. But it's certainly at the beginning they weren't happy, and the new first years typically are not very happy until they get used to it. And it takes them a while to learn to trust us, that this isn't a punitive thing, but really just to get them to read more on every rotation. And in the scoring system, we had to remind the faculty to avoid grade inflation. And I'm proud of the faculty in that it settled down quite nicely. Most of the fellows are getting Bs and sometimes lower, and it's very rare now that a fellow gets an A+. And that's exactly the way we wanted it to be. But when it started, everyone was getting A+. So let me just show you some of the questions, and you'll get an idea of the nature of the questions. Again, these are given to the fellows a week before the start of the rotation. And then the faculty are given these questions for the oral examination. And these are typical. This, for example, is the esophageal subspecialty rotation questions. explain the physiology and motility of the esophagus and stomach, bring an example, and be prepared to explain the following motility tracings, achalasia, scleroderma, and so forth. So the fellow had a whole month to go and find a tracing that is typical for this, and then bring it in and discuss it. So you can see that if you take this exam seriously, which the fellows do, there's a lot of work to be done in the month, but in the process, they're really mastering the questions. Really bread and butter questions for a GI fellow. How do you manage the patient with Barrett's esophagus and no dysplasia, low-grade dysplasia, high-grade dysplasia? And we tell the faculty that the fellow is allowed to have their own opinion. They may not agree with all guidelines. You know, they kind of get bonus points for really showing their maturity of the topic. Here are some of the motility subspecialty rotation questions. Then, for example, here's some of the general GI rotation questions. Explain your approach to the patient with acute or chronic diarrhea. How do you treat Helicobacter pylori? How do you treat Helicobacter pylori in a patient allergic to penicillin? And we have this for all the rotations. So it's been a wonderful learning experience for all of us. Subjectively, the fellows have told me that they find the sections where they've had end of rotational oral examinations, they found those sections in the AGA in-servicing exam and the board exams easier to answer, but I haven't yet had a chance to correlate the scores with the end of rotation questions yet, or whether they've had that particular set of questions already. So in the interest of time, I'll conclude and then answer questions. As Amy and I have discussed, the new program requirements bring new challenges, but one of the best things we can do is talk amongst the program directors and see what we're all experiencing and solve each other's problems so that we're not all reinventing the wheel. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any further questions.
Anton?
Hello?
Yeah, hi. So you have a half hour for the oral exam. Do you just pick a few questions from that list?
Yeah, exactly. So the fellows are told to prepare all of them, but the faculty can ask any of the questions.
How many do you usually get through, 3 or 4?
Yeah, but it depends on the faculty. We're learning as we go along. Some of the faculty have now asked whether they could ask the fellows to write short essays or paragraph answers. And I just say go for it.
Well, I think it's very good. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share really with everybody your list of questions.
Yeah, the question came up last time. I don't have a problem with it. I think we should. I'll double check with Amy and then, you know, it'd be lovely if we could start a bank of the questions and then just share it amongst each other. I mean, there are no secrets.
And it's something we could distribute, you know, over the listserv.
Yeah. I mean, as you look at some of the fun stuff here, you know, this helps with the making fellows aware of the cost of medicine. So for the end of the rotation, they need to come and bring the answers to find out what the following tests cost at Mayo Clinic and bring the answers with you to the examination, an MRI of the brain, CT enterography.
That's great.
And the light bulbs go off that fellows come and say, oh my goodness, I had no idea what that sort of costs.
I think that's great.
Anton, this is Amy. The other thing that's nice about this list, even if some institutions don't have the time or resources, let's say, to block the calendars to do an oral examination, what can be helpful using a list like this is if you need to, let's say, work on your electronic or some type of curriculum and make sure that you're covering all of these things in your rotations. At least when we were revising our curriculum, I used, you know, Anton shared these with me, and I used them to rewrite our curriculum for nutrition based on these questions, knowing that these are a nice framework of what fellows should know during a given rotation. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And there are lots more. They're so much fun. I mean, you know, if someone graduating from a fellowship should know the surveillance guidelines after polypectomy. When you ask fellows before they've actually had a chance to prepare this answer, that most don't know. I think we should share them. I'll double check with Amy, and then it'll be a pleasure to share them.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Not a question, but a quick comment. This is Mike Brown at Rush. The ACG Education Committee met this weekend, and one of the things we thought we would try to get together, speaking of listservs, is get a list from the program directors at institutions or maybe their program coordinators of what CQI projects fellows have done, because unlike original research, certainly copying someone else is a good idea. Using their outcomes measures and tools would be handy and easy for them, and then put that up at the fellows space up on the ACG website. So hopefully we're putting together just something simple that the PCs or PDs can fill out on what kind of CQI projects they've done, what the question was, what the tools used were for outcome, and maybe even a little bit of, sort of cross-pollination between institutions could happen with that. So I think that'd make it easier for fellows to find useful projects for their institutions.
That would be great.
I think it's a great idea, but the program directors are not society specific, so it really should be available at all websites, for fellows and program directors to access everywhere.
Right, I agree.
Yeah. Anton, I did have a comment about the in-service exam.
Yeah.
When it first came out, it was definitely, the emphasis was on saying it's a formative exam, and I think that was a big deal when 500 fellows out of 1,400 were taking it. Right now, we're approaching, I think, almost 95% of fellows are taking the exam. The registration was, I think it broke 1,200.
Okay.
And I am actually using this. I have set the one objective milestone that I can point at, because nothing else is objective, is I say, you have to hit the 15th percentile. If you don't, then I have to have a remediation plan for your academic performance for medical knowledge. If you miss it 2 years in a row, then you're on probation. Because at the end of the program, you actually do have to produce a trainee who can pass the board exam. That's a quality measure that they're going after.
So I agree with you. I tried that this year, and I started developing a document that I was going to distribute to the fellows, and they just heard about it and pushed back and quoted the AGA guidelines about the use of the scores. But I agree with you, and I'm interested in if you've got any pushback.
No, I didn't get any pushback.
What about anyone else?
I don't have anything about pushback, but I at least having started to track this much more carefully over the last year or so, it does have good predictive value.
Oh, yeah.
That's an interesting question, and I've actually spent several years now trying to track USMLE scores of the fellows, like their boards part 1 from when they're a medical student, against the in-service exam and against their GI board results. And it doesn't track very well. And, other than the people at the extremes of the bell curve, because I think what happens is the in-service exam serves as a wonderful wake-up tool for fellows.
Yeah.
And so the ones that are sort of performing a standard deviation below the mean, they start studying like crazy. And they really jump their performance on the follow-up exams.
So if nothing else, the wake-up call for the extreme is helpful. So you used 15% as...
Right. Well, that's that's been sort of in the past the cutoff for the pass rate for the first-time takers. The 85th percentile. Well, the other way around, the 15th percentile. There's an 85% pass rate for first-time GI boards takers. It's actually been a little higher in the last few years. But I thought 15 was, a good, safe place to give us a little margin.
15 is low.
Yeah. Yes, it is. 15 is about 1.5 standard deviations below the mean.
So there's not a risk that the fellows will be, not as motivated as they could be if you set it a little bit higher?
Well, what I emphasize to them is this is not they're not actually being tested against themselves. They're being tested against a group, which ultimately is exactly how you go through your board's exams. You're not being tested against an outside objective standard. You're being tested against your performance within the group.
Yeah. And I think setting it at 15, especially if you have the policy that 2 consecutive years of 15 or lower puts you on probation, I think when the stakes of probation are pretty significant, I think I think it's probably good to have a cutoff where you're not going to have, an excessive number of people on probation. So I think it's probably a good way to correlate it with the pass rate for first-time test takers.
Yeah.
What we also tell our fellows is that their elective rotations are not a guarantee, and that I may use them I may use certain rotations to fill in knowledge gaps based on their in-service exams. So are there any other questions? Or Avi, do you want to say something?
Well, thank you very much, Amy and Anton. This is really a great program. I think that today, the discussion with everyone is very helpful as well. I don't have